Welcome everyone to another edition of Android Office Hours. The first thing I want to do today is introduce everybody that's here ready to answer your questions. We'll start over to my left. Go ahead, Trevor.
Hi everyone, my name is Trevor Johns, and I am a member of we're all members of the Android Developer Relations team here at Google. Alex.
Hi, my name is Alexander Lucas. I'm also on the Android Developer Relations team.
I'm Joe Fernandez, also part of Developer Relations.
All right, so I want to remind everyone that if you've joined us, please +1 us so that we get some idea of how many people are actually joining us in the Hangout all the time. And if everybody's ready, we'll go on to our first question that we take from Moderator. The question is, what's the easiest way to view the source code layout files of system apps like Gallery and Calendar for the purposes of emulating UI patterns? And how to go about emulating UI patterns of apps where this won't be possible, like Gmail?
All right, I'll take that then. So for the first question, the easiest way, you really have two options. The canonical answer is to go to source.android.com, follow the instructions there, and check out the source for Android directly from our Git repository. Now, if you don't feel like checking out the entire Git repository, which does take a little bit of time, it's rather large, you can go to GitHub, and there is a mirror of our source up there, which you can go ahead and view. And that's not maintained by us. So first off, it's not official. We can't vouch for its authenticity, and I do know from experience there actually are some repositories on there that are missing. But if you just want to view the source, that's a very quick, simple solution. But again, the real answer is just go ahead and check out our source directly from our Git repository, source.android.com. So for the second question, how to go about emulating the UI patterns of apps where you can't check out the source code like Gmail. So that's actually a good question, and the answer is you just have to try and figure out how it's implemented. There's no, you're not going to be able to. Now you can use Hierarchy Viewer and at least see which building blocks are used to go and create it. So that'll show, say, a relative layout was used here, a linear layout was used here. It'll even tell you the class names of custom view elements or custom views that are inserted, but you won't be able to see the actual code that was used to go and create it. Unfortunately, those programs, the source isn't available, so there really isn't any way to get around that. So, all right.
Yeah. One more thing that I would add to that is it would be worth checking out the Android Design Guide, which won't give you the code for how these things are implemented, but will at least give you an idea of the design considerations that went into, for instance, in Gmail, like why Gmail operates the way it did, and what the ideas were behind developing that particular user experience.
And one last thing to note, most of the UI components we use in our apps are available publicly, either as part of the Android SDK or as part of the support package. So between those two, you have probably, I'd say, 90% of the widgets we use. The other ones are, one-off special cases. So most of what you need to go and emulate our look and feel is already out there.
Okay, thank you both, Trevor and Alex. We'll move on to the next question from Moderator. And that is, we are planning multiple apps that would be capable of standing alone, but should have single login capability. If you're logged into one, you're logged into all. Is there a known way to do this, or a recommendation?
I can take this one. So it's not super clear from the question if you're logging into a web service or not. It sort of sounds like a just standalone set of apps that you want to share data between, like locally on the device. If it is to a web service, then you definitely want to have one of those apps act as a provider and interact and create an account through the account manager, and then all of the other apps will be able to access the account that way. If it's not, then it becomes a little bit trickier. You have lots of options, but let's see. Part of the problem is that it doesn't sound like you have one app that you're guaranteed to have on the device all the time. It's like, I don't know, maybe out of 5 apps you could have any 2 or any 3 or like any subset. That basically means that you have to find a way to either broadcast the information to all the other apps, probably through like a content provider, or having some sort of custom intent that you would check package manager and see all of the apps that listen for that specific intent and then sort of blast the data at all of those. Or dump the data that you want to share into a shared storage like SD card or something. Neither of those is particularly secure, especially the shared storage approach. Even the intent approach, you could theoretically someone else could listen for the same intent. You would have to use some sort of encryption mechanism, assuming that this was data that you wanted to keep private. If it was just preferences or something, I imagine you wouldn't care too much about that.
Yeah, if you're storing in the app, did you mention storing in the apps data folder and using a signature?
Yeah, storing in the app's private folder becomes and then accessing it via like a content provider.
Right.
Would be one way, but you would have to sort of authenticate to the other app that you were sort of the same overall thing.
Yeah, I can't remember. I think I want to say Package Manager does allow does provide a mechanism to go and access another data directly. Another app's data directly, assuming the signatures match.
Assuming the apps are signed with the same key.
I'm not 100% sure that's the way it works, but I think it is.
I believe so.
Yeah. So, and if not, then just use a content provider, which does definitely provide that functionality. So.
Right. If you happen to be online and could give us a little more context as to is this standalone versus web service, or just sort of what you're trying to accomplish, we might be able to give you a more specific answer. We kind of had to shotgun all the possibilities on this one.
All right.
Can we get somebody live? Can we get some live person?
Do we have a question from a live person up there?
Just wave your hands wildly if you want to ask a question.
Okay. Since we don't seem to, we'll go on to another question from moderator. How can I create a search interface in my app that uses the new search widget in the action bar for Honeycomb and later, while falling back to the old interface for pre-Honeycomb?
That's a good question, and the answer is there's not really a single prepackaged solution we can give you for this. So for those who don't know, starting with Honeycomb, the action bar has a search widget you can go ahead and insert. And when you do that, you get a magnifying glass and a text field up the top of the screen. If you try and use an older device, everything you put in the action bar just becomes an entry in the options menu. The option menu doesn't allow custom views, so you can't insert a search box. If you click the search hardware button on those older devices, then we do go and on newer devices will automatically take you into the that search widget. On older devices will pop up whatever you have registered to go and handle search. So the answer there is really take whatever view you use to go and display your search results, implement it as a fragment. And then on newer devices, whenever you go and enter that search view, just use the fragment manager, bring that up to the front, and use that to go and display your search results. On older devices, same process to go ahead and display that same fragment and then add another one on top of it, which will implement the text field that will actually go and receive the search input. So again, we don't have a really good prepackaged solution for you, but it's not that hard to go and implement manually. So really, it's just a matter of using fragments like everything else when you're trying to do both a phone and a tablet UI, or in this case, a pre-Honeycomb and a post-Honeycomb display.
Thank you, Trevor. Let's go on to another question here in moderator. Is there a best way to implement infinite horizontal pagination? The setup is 3 views in a view group that get filled with the data I want to display, such as a day of calendar data, so that the user can navigate between days. It needs to be able to loop between them.
Okay, I can take this one. So there's no way that's built directly into ViewPager. There's no like set infinite mode or anything like that. I know that some users or some developers, have figured out a way that basically involves in a custom view adapter, in the on scroll state changed method, I want to say, basically just keep resetting the indicator's page number to 1. So that in like 3 states of like 0, 1, and 2, just every time you scroll over to a different one, just reset it to 1 so it stays in the middle, and then it'll let you sort of keep scrolling to the side. and then you just need to make sure to update which view gets pulled in. The code that I saw that actually did this, I want to say it was called Electric Sleep. It's I had to look up the answer on Stack Overflow when I was looking into how to do this myself. But I would say just search for Electric Sleep, and there's a good sample of how to do it.
Great, thank you very much, Alex. I want to remind people that if you join our Hangout, please +1 us so that we can get a count.
Or even if you're not in the Hangout and just watching the live view
right.
as well.
Right.
Yeah, that's certainly true. That's a good point. We'll go on to another question in Moderator. When should developers stop using C2DM and start developing a custom notification solution? I noticed some messaging apps, I guess, like WhatsApp, installs a constantly running service while Google Plus Messenger doesn't. What is the best pattern to follow?
Right. So the answer is use C2DM whenever possible with a few caveats. So really there's two cases where C2DM might not be appropriate. The first is if you have really time-constrained notifications you have to deliver to a lot of people. So the example here is, let's say that you're some municipality, you're a city or a state government, and you want to go and blast a notification out to everybody in your state within 60 seconds because there's a flash flood warning or some other major disaster. In that case, we do have short-term limits that go and control how fast you can go and inject messages into the C2DM system. And in that case, you might not, if you have a very large number of users, you might not be able to send them quick enough to us. So that's one case. And also, I should know we don't have bulk messaging functionality yet, so you still do have to address each user individually. Now, the other case where you might run into problems is instant messaging apps. And the reason for that is because we have a limit on the maximum number of messages that can be sent to a certain device per day. And if my memory serves me correctly, right now it's set to 1,000 messages per device per day. If you do the math, this works out to roughly, I think it was once every 90 seconds. If you're sending messages constantly 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, you have to send one message every 90 seconds to a device to this limit. So it's not something you can hit easily. That said, the one case where we do see people tend to run up against this limit is IM apps, and that's because you have a handful of power users who actually do go and receive 3,000 to 4,000 messages a day because they're just constantly sending messages back and forth between a lot of people, and that's just the way it is. Most users, even on IM apps, won't hit this limit, but again, you do have those power users who do. And that's, I think, the most common case where people have to go and investigate alternatives besides C2DM. We've been looking at ways to go and try and improve the C2DM service to go and work for these use cases. But until we have a good solution in place, the recommended approach is to go and have an XMPP fallback. So use C2DM to go and wake the app up, because C2DM by far is going to be the lowest power usage. That's the reason why we want people to use C2DM, is because it drops power usage on the device when nothing's happening. So C2DM will bring the app up into the foreground, and then it can go and handle the messages. And after it's done that, again, this is only for really high traffic apps like IM apps. Open up a background XMPP session and have that wait around for 60 seconds, 90 seconds, 2 minutes, just in case the user is actually actively engaged in a conversation. And what that'll do is it'll offload the traffic from the C2DM service, and you can just deliver it directly through the device through XMPP. Now, while your XMPP connection is open, your app's going to be draining more power than it would otherwise. So you do eventually want to go and close this back down and switch back to XMPP as your primary notification method. But again, when you're actually in the conversation, there's a lot of traffic taking place, maybe you want to consider XMPP. Again, most apps don't need to worry about this. And I should also add, as one last bit, if you do run into quota issues with C2DM, we do have a quota page. I can't remember the URL off the top of my head, but if you just search for Android C2DM quota, it explains what the default quota is, but there's also a form there that you can go ahead and use to request more. We can't necessarily accommodate all requests, but we'll certainly work with you and see what's possible. So if you are running up against these quotas, definitely let us know and we can tell you what's possible. All right.
Thank you, Trevor. Yeah, we have 2 questions coming up on our chat, so I want to go to the first one. Matthew, I see you have a question, and I'll come back to you in a second. First of all, I'm going to go with Garrett Rogers, and he asks, what is the best way to handle broadcasting small messages, in your opinion?
So,
Broadcasting from the device?
yeah, so are you just saying like broadcasting messages from one app to another, or broadcasting messages off the device? As an alternative,
As the CCDM. Okay.
so you're broadcasting the message to the device from a server. And so by small, I assume we're talking about a payload of a few hundred bytes or less, basically.
And he says to lots of users.
So you're basically
Okay.
trying to do a big bulk notification to everyone at once. And okay, I mean that's sort of tricky. And the reason for that is basically because first off, you're going to be limited by your service bandwidth. How quickly can you go and message all these devices? Usually when it comes down to push, the best option out there, again, C2DM, which is actually based on top of XMPP, but if you're not using C2DM, XMPP is going to be your best option. And you do have to keep in mind, though, every time you open another XMPP session, you're going to be using more battery power. The benefit of C2DM is it's able to go and aggregate all these different, background connections into just one. But if you're running into our quotas, or you're just not able to inject the messages fast enough, then that's really going to be your only option. I will add, though, you can also send messages over the text messaging system, so over SMS. And there are ways you can go ahead and hook your app into the SMS framework and go and have your app and treat them specially. So that's another thing we've seen some apps use when they really do have, especially real-time notification requirements, is to go and tap into SMS, which is also finely tuned to try and get those messages delivered as quickly as possible. Not 100% reliable, but that's probably the best option out there, I'd say.
Yeah. I would say also, depending on how immediate you need the message to get out to users. So if you only need them to get the data like on the same day and not necessarily that very minute, it might be worth just having the app pull like once a day, just like log into the server, see if there's any messages. And that way you don't have to worry about individually sending out to these whatever million plus users.
Yeah.
You can just have the million of them like check into the server.
And if it is time critical, but you know it's coming ahead of time, you could also go and have the app downloaded ahead of time and have a timestamp on there when it should be displayed. So we do see a lot of people using push messaging for cases where you don't need to. So on some other platforms, if you want to go and say display a notification badge as part of the home, on the launcher, or in our case up in the notification bar, the best option to do that is push messaging on some other platforms. On Android, you really don't have to do that because your app can go and wake up whenever you want, and it can go and surface notifications without receiving a push message first. So again, look very carefully whether or not you even need to be using push messaging in the first place, and if there's maybe some alternative that might go and avoid that. Again, it depends on the nature of your app. Might not be the case.
Okay, I think we should move on here. I'm waiting still for Matthew. In the meantime, let's go back to moderator. We've got a question. What is the fastest way to draw an image on top of the camera preview? And then there's a link to this question in Stack Overflow.
All right. So we took a look at this earlier, and the question is basically, it does boil down to how do you go and composite a view on top of a surface view. And as far as we can tell, we're actually not sure why you're having a performance problem. The advice we can give you, take a look at the built-in camera app and see how that goes and implements it. It uses overlays to go and display, say, for example, the flash indicator or the focus brackets. So the built-in camera code is already doing that. Again, Android's open source. That code is available for you to check out and copy if you need. So take a look at the camera app, just see how it's doing the compositing, and try and implement something similar in your code. One of our coworkers, Dan Galpin, did something recently, and he took the same approach. He checked out the camera app and just based his changes off of that. And even without hardware acceleration enabled, he was able to get good performance. So without seeing your code, I don't know why specifically you're having a performance problem, but I can say if you do look at that example, that will show you a good approach to do this that does not suffer from performance problems.
Okay, thank you, Trevor. Matthew, you can, first of all, I see Brian's question, but Matthew was in here first, so I think what we'll do is if Matthew's ready to ask his question, we'll take his first and then go right on to Brian's.
Hey, how's it going?
Hi, Matthew.
So I was just curious about when you have a service and an activity and you want them to talk to each other. Let's say the service is collecting data and the activity wants to do something with it. What's the best way for them to talk? Would you guys implement a singleton class, hold the data for each of them statically, or would you deal with it using intents, or would you store it in a database and have the database, or sorry, have the activity access that database? What do you think would be the best way for the two of them to interchange the information?
Now, so what type of information are we talking about? Is there some real-time constraint here, or
let's say
it's also how important is it to get this delivered? If this message doesn't get delivered, is there going to be another chance, or is it something different?
Let's say it's instant messaging, for example.
Okay.
And yeah.
I think the usual pattern I've seen for stuff like this. So, assuming one, you do have a requirement that this is displayed fairly quickly. You're okay with maybe 100 milliseconds of latency or something.
Yeah.
So it's not absolutely real time, but at the same time, you do want to display it fairly quickly. And if the data is lost, it would be an inconvenience. So, given that, what I'd probably recommend doing, take your data, put it into a content provider, and then send out a broadcast intent to the other application, letting them know that the data has been updated, and then allow it to push it out of the content provider. So what that does is your intent gets you the real-time notification, and the content provider gives you persistent storage. So even if something does happen, if your app, for example, doesn't receive the intent, or something a process gets terminated due to low memory, you still have your message stored somewhere, and the next time the app does come back up to the foreground, it'll be able to retrieve it, even if that intent somehow didn't get delivered.
Okay, that makes sense. Just a quick follow-up question, if you don't mind.
Sure.
When it receives the broadcast intent, and let's say you have your list view displaying the data, what's the best way to update the list view with the new data? Would you reset the adapter, or would you just, how do you handle that?
That's such a good question. I can't remember how you do that off the top of my head.
I'm completely blanking on the method call, but there's a method call for a list view where you basically say that the data that backs the list view is changing, and it should refresh.
Register an observer on the backing data.
Register observer should be for a new observer, though.
Okay, so it would be the notified data set changed method?
That's the one.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Cool. Excellent. Thanks so much.
Yeah,
Welcome. And as I promised, let's go right to Brian. I'm using async tasks for my network communication, which works until I do something that takes a while, like uploading an image. The long upload blocks all the other requests from happening. Do you have any ideas of what I could do to get around this? It says execute on executor isn't an option because we're targeting 2.3. I could create a thread dedicated to long requests. Are there any other options?
Yes. So, well, first off, so async task is usually recommended for short bursts, something like, say, writing to disk. Or maybe if you're just doing a very basic, HTTP post somewhere or HTTP get, and you're just going to get back a very small blob of JSON, maybe that's appropriate. But for anything that's really long running, or where you might have, especially if you want running concurrently, then you need to look at alternative options. And it really does boil down to two things. One, yes, you can go ahead and create a separate thread. Or two, consider making a background service, which might even be registered as a sync adapter, depending on what sort of model they're using. So on top of that, I usually like to ask people when they are trying to do network communication, is this really something that has to happen in real time when the app is running? Because the user might not have network connectivity. So if it's something that you can actually go and queue up, maybe you really do want that background service running as a sync adapter that's going and trying to optimistically fetch the data in the background. And then when you're displaying the data, you just go and display whatever is stored locally in your content provider. And that way, even if the user doesn't have a network connection, you can still go and get them you can get them relatively fresh results. And since everything is coming off of disk, everything's happening very quickly. So that's usually the best pattern, as long as you don't have some real-time constraint. And even if you do, that does, you're not going to suffer much of a performance penalty there. So this is the model Gmail uses. And when you get a message in Gmail, it gets displayed pretty quickly on the phone. So just something to keep in mind there. But going back to your original question, I would go with either a thread or a service, depending on which one makes more sense for your app.
Okay. Well, I mean, if I use a service, I have to make a new thread anyway, right?
Essentially, well, you're actually creating either a new thread or a new process, depending on how it's defined. But yes, essentially, it will create a new thread of execution, and there is that overhead. Generally, though, it is the correct approach. So.
Okay.
Thank you, Trevor. We have a question now from Josh Brown. Go ahead, Josh.
Hi, thank you. So I've been working on, or my company in general has been working on switching over to using responsive design rather than just the pure bucket design for taking care of our layouts and stuff like that, and trying to take advantage of the new resource qualifiers that are available. One issue that we're kind of running into is like our creative department, is kind of used to working in like Photoshop and Illustrator and those type of tools, where you kind of have more absolute positioning,
Yep.
and they're having a hard time visualizing, how things are going to scale and so forth as you're adjusting these layouts and figuring out where to place the good breakpoints and everything. As a developer, I've been able to use Eclipse for doing that type of stuff, just using the graphic layout editor to make prototypes, and that tends to work pretty well. Eclipse is kind of a tool that's a little bit, might go over their heads a little bit, especially when you get into the resource management portion. And so I was wondering if you had any ideas as far as tools that are available that'll get, that level of flexibility without necessarily the brain damage of having to deal with the resource system.
So I do know a while back somebody did create a Java app, which basically was a WYSIWYG layout designer, and it would actually you can go and export XML for you. It was limited. Can't say it was much better than Eclipse. I found the UI was slightly nicer, but it's also sort of dated. So I can't think. Yeah, DroidDraw is the one I'm thinking of. So I mean, you could look at that, but honestly, if you really want a top-notch UI, you're not going to get it from DroidDraw. So unfortunately, the best advice I can give you, and I mean, even ignoring what you said about Eclipse being difficult for designers, usually the best option for design is use a tool like Omnigraffle or Visio or something on that order to go and do your wireframes. If you want a more high-quality UI mock, you can go ahead and do that in Photoshop. But really, when it comes to your actual UI design, that does tend to be the best approach.
Right. Yeah.
It's not as easy. I know I've been there, but generally speaking, though, that's going to give you the most flexibility and also let you to go and experiment a little bit more and try and come up with some ideas that maybe the built-in views don't let you get away with.
Right. Yeah. We've been using Omnigraffle a lot for actually making the wireframes themselves, and then using Photoshop for a lot of the custom UI elements that might require a bit more code to actually make something functional.
Yep.
But yeah,
the Android in your background there.
Oh yeah.
Awesome.
But yeah, really the biggest problem is like compositing layouts and so forth. Dealing with like fragments and everything. If you're dealing with like Omnigraffle and Photoshop, you kind of have to redraw them every time.
Yep.
Every time you shift them, and that kind of makes it hard to visualize how things are actually going to shift.
Yeah, unfortunately, we don't have a better solution right now. I will say that a new layout manager called Grid Layout, and one of the benefits of Grid Layout is it's a lot easier for design tools to go and work with. So there's not much out there right now that really takes good advantage of it, but in the future you might see some more developer tools coming out based off of that.
Okay.
Right now, though, there's not much I can really give you besides what you've already mentioned.
All right. Thank you.
Yep, totally.
Thank you.
And Matthew said droid draw. Thank you, Matthew. Let's go back now to moderator. We have a question. A huge issue for us. There's a link there. I think I don't know whether that's a link to.
It's to Stack Overflow.
It's to Stack Overflow. Okay, fine. It's been up for a while. Nobody knows how to help. Can you please take a look? The problem is that views overlaid on the last frame of a full screen video don't redraw properly when turning the screen on and off.
Yeah, I actually looked at this question around the time that it popped up on Stack Overflow. I forwarded it to the Android media team. They're looking at it, but we don't really have an answer for you yet. Like, not really sure why that's happening.
All right.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'll also add that when you do run into really odd bugs, again, in this case, the person didn't know if they were doing something wrong or right. But you can report system bugs, anything with the framework, the OS, any part of Android, at b.android.com. That's our issue tracker. You're not going to get developer help saying you should use this block of code, or versus some other. But if you are able to go and actually narrow something down to the point that you're reasonably confident it is a bug in the system, and honestly, looking at this, that would probably be my first inclination or my first guess as well. Certainly, if you're welcome to go and open up a bug there and let us know that way as well. Right.
There's another question up on chat. It says, my app is currently syncing to Google Tasks using a sync adapter. I want to add Google Calendar sync. Should I use the same sync adapter or create a separate one for this?
That's actually a very good question. My guess...
Does Google Tasks use the same content provider on the device as Google Calendar?
There is no Google Tasks content provider.
Okay.
So they've created their own using the Tasks API.
I see.
I guess actually that's a good point. So in this specific instance, if you're running on Ice Cream Signature Bub, use the calendar provider that's baked into the system. But if you are running on older phones, you don't have that option. So in that case, so let's see. Oh, apparently Rado answered and said to use two content providers.
Yes,
okay.
I would agree with that.
Yeah, if Rado says two content providers, then Rado's correct.
The reason I would say that, and I don't know, I don't see where Rado answered it, but in any event, what I would say is you probably want to do that because then you're giving the user the option of syncing one without syncing the other. Because they can only, when they choose to add an account under accounts and sync, they can only, what they're really doing is choosing an account and then they choose the sync adapters under it that they want to use. And if you only use one sync adapter, it'll run regardless of whether they want to use just sync tasks or sync tasks and calendar. So splitting them in two gives them more of a choice.
Okay, but yeah, generally speaking, if Rado saw something, Rado's correct.
Right.
So, all right.
And then I want to just read here. Brian said that David, and I'm not going to even try to pronounce that, Prisabilia had a great question on the post. Can you give some details about how to use a map view inside a fragment? Map view seems to need a map activity to work. Well, no, Redo's answered it. Okay, so.
Well, oh, okay, so Redo answered Brian's question.
Right. That's why I was confused.
Okay, that makes sense. So, yeah, so then going back to the question about sync adapters. Yeah, I comment about Rado aside, yeah, I think we still go with two. I think that sounds like the best approach. Yeah, so, and for those who are wondering about map use inside of fragments, the answer for that, at least for compatibility purposes, I don't believe you can. I think if you're running purely on Ice Cream Sandwich, there is, you can use a map activity and go ahead and do that. But if you're trying to write an app that runs pre-Honeycomb, there's not a good solution for that yet. We are aware of it though, so.
Okay. Thank you, Trevor. let's go back to moderator here. Before I go forward, I just wanted to remind people to +1 us so that we can find out, get a rough idea of how many people are watching us. So, moderator question, when you add dynamically a fragment replacing a layout element, the onCreateView method is always called even if the element of the layout is not present in the layout anymore. This goes back to a Stack Overflow question.
Actually, before we answer that, going back to the previous question,
Right.
I think it's actually, no, it's map activity on phones, map fragment on tablets. Map
Okay.
fragment is not part of the support package. But again, we are aware of that.
Okay.
Now to the next question.
Okay. So for this one, it doesn't really state a question here, but I'm kind of inferring that it's basically how to prevent the view hierarchy inside the fragment from flushing out when the fragment isn't even visible. And that's in onCreateView. One of the parameters that's going to be passed is the view group container. And if the fragment is invisible and attached to the layout, then that container is going to be null. So just do a check in onCreateView. If container is null, then return null. And then you bail out of that, and none of your view hierarchy gets created, and no cycles are burned on an invisible fragment, basically.
Okay, thank you, Alex. I'm looking at the next question in moderator. Do you want to?
Yeah, I can go ahead and answer that.
Okay, the next question in moderator that we have is our developer account was suspended 8 months ago due to violations of the TOS, the terms of service. How do we best present our case and the changes we have made to the Android market team? We tried the email appeal process but haven't received any replies. And it also says, we love Android.
All right, so the answer there, there's two answers. First off, the biggest mistake I see people make when they're trying to go and make an appeal to the market team is they send us lots of emails. And what happens when you send us lots of emails is then we have to go and close out every one of those other emails that you sent us as a duplicate. And not only does that create a lot more work for the market team, in theory it's possible they could make a mistake and close out the wrong one. So if you are making an appeal, please just send us one email, reply to the original email we sent you saying that there's been a terms of service violation, let that open up a ticket, and then we'll get to it. It does take us a little bit of time to go and process those appeals, so a little bit of patience is necessary. And just remember, every time you go and start a new email thread, it's actually just slowing things down. Now, as for this specific case, I don't know what's happened there. I'd need to go ahead and take a look at the case to go and find out. So if you can go ahead and send us the ticket number, the original ticket number, for your case, we can go ahead and pull it up in our system and see what the status of the appeal was. So.
Who should they send this to?
I'd say just leave it as a comment on either if you're watching live, leave it as a comment in the chat and we can write it down, or if you're not watching live, either leave it as a comment on the Hangout, or failing that, you can go ahead and send me a message directly on Google+. Once again, my name is Trevor Johns, and yeah, just send me the case number from the subject of your email, and we can go ahead and find out what happened there.
Okay. Then we have two questions in a row here on moderator that we should probably sort of jointly handle. One says, can we get a follow-up on the ability to comment on comments in the Android market? This was a takeaway from a Hangout we had a couple of weeks ago. Is this a feature you're potentially interested in, or is it being dismissed for now? And then someone asks, when is map fragment coming? Okay, so I assume we want to say something about our time machine.
I think so.
Yeah.
Okay. You can see here in the foreground, and Joe Fernandez is pointing to it, is our time machine, and unfortunately our time machine is broken, so we're unable to go into the future and comment about things that may be happening there. And you just have to understand that these are questions that we're not going to be able to answer. So let's, and we have some nice sound effects. Thank you, Joe.
Still broken.
It's still on the table.
Still not, yeah, it's still on the table, so it's still not going anyplace. Okay. The next question is, any updated comments on HTML5 apps versus Android apps, given the recent Chrome beta release and the potential to expose richer Android APIs via a framework like WebWorks?
We've been pretty consistent since the Hangout started on just saying native apps tend to present a better user experience. So in terms of updated comments, not really.
Yeah, I mean, I will say, we do love HTML5. It's awesome. That being said, you still do have to weigh which one's appropriate. Web apps do have a few benefits. Among them, the cross-platform. That's probably the biggest one. You'll need to install them. But right now, native apps do get you a bit better performance. They do get you, access to a few more APIs that aren't part of the HTML5 spec, and they get you versus Android market. I expect to see all those things improving steadily over time, and at some point we might get to a point where there's parity. I don't think we're there quite yet, but we're trying to get things better. Again, we do love HTML5, so nothing against it. I'll also add that right now the features available in Chrome aren't available yet as a web view. So based on that too, if you're hoping to take advantage of Chrome inside of an app, that's not yet possible. So.
Great, thank you, Trevor. Once again, to Google Moderator, I have a widget app with collection-backed stack view and list view widgets. I have 3 types of content, 2 layouts, and 2 sizes. I want to display only the 3 types in the widget picker. Is it possible, or do I have to crowd the widget picker with all of them?
I think we actually answered this one last week. This is a repeat question.
I think so too.
Okay.
Yeah, I think actually we're starting to get down to the bottom of the barrel. A lot of these are actually questions we gave to last week and just didn't get deleted. So.
All right. Al?
Yeah.
The stencil question we answered last week too.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think for the most part we're actually down to last week. So saying, let's see what time are we at now. So we have roughly 15 minutes. If somebody does want to go ahead and ask us live questions, we certainly would love to answer them. So my screen's typing, so.
Let's see if we get anything. Raise your hand if you're... Okay, somebody raised their hand. Go ahead. Go ahead. Raise your hand if you're... Okay, somebody raised their hand. Go ahead. Go ahead. Raise your hand if you're... Okay, somebody raised their hand. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Ah, cool. Yeah, and I think now the one that's 2 over from us on the left, actually, yeah, that guy.
Okay.
Christopher. All right. How's it going? You had a question for us. If you don't have a mic, you could type it in. Because we don't hear you, so.
Christopher, is there any way to get a full packet capture out of Android, something like Live PCAP?
Yes. And the answer is, for the most part, use PCAP. So you need to have a rooted device. So for most people, that means use an emulator. If you do have a device that has an unlocked firmware, you can go ahead and load on a custom firmware and void your warranty. But most of the time, we recommend just using the emulator for this because you do get root on there. And then use ADB to go and push up your own whatever tools you want. So usually that means building a custom build, a TCP dump, and then that's built for ARM processors, and then pushing that to the phone and running it there. And then you can go and copy your packet capture onto your computer for analysis. So it's certainly possible. You can't do it on an unrooted phone, but as long as you're willing to work around that, it is possible.
We have a question, a couple of questions about sync adapters on chat. Could you explain more about what sync adapters scant documentation? That's from Brian, and then Gabriel follows up and says, I've got a follow-up. How can I specify the name of a sync adapter shown at accounts in sync? Currently, both just show sync adapter. Oh, sync app name. I can comment, which is, you're right, there is very little documentation about sync adapters. I suggest that you look at the sample sync adapter sample app under resources, which gives an example of using a sync adapter to sync between the contacts provider for the People app and Google Contacts in the cloud. Other than that, we don't have very much information, but you can, sample sync adapter has all of the files to install a sync adapter, and some of the files are in the XML directory, and in the XML directory there's one called, I think it's called syncadapter.xml, and that gives all of the settings for the sync adapter itself, and I think one of the settings in there is used to specify what name shows up. And unfortunately, that's all I can say about it for the moment. Okay, so he has an app idea that would have, oh, so Christopher's following up. I had an app idea that would have required analysis of live packets. If it requires root, that is great to know. Thank you. I'm sure you would maybe have more information if you had your time machine working. Yes, that's probably true.
Yeah, and like I have seen some other people do this, and yeah, it is certainly possible to do it entirely on the device, assuming the device has root. So I actually did take TCP dump and bundled it up inside of an APK one. So it is possible, but you know, as long as it's running on a rooted device.
Okay, are there any other questions? No?
I think I see at least one new one on moderator.
Okay.
The testing with device overdose.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
Let's go to that question. Testing with a device overdose, and then there's a link to Stack Overflow. Could there be a way for Google to connect us to phone manufacturers so we could test our applications before we start getting crash reports and angry user comments on market?
So, in that case, probably the best option we can give you, there's a third-party company called Testroid. They have a product where you go and you create either a Monkey Runner or Robotium tests for your application. You upload your APK along with those tests to their server, and then they have a bank of a few hundred phones, and they go and execute your tests on all those phones in parallel, and then they take screenshots and build graphs showing you success versus failure rates. So if you really do want to go and test your application on all those devices simultaneously, that's probably the most scalable way to do it. So
I know there's also another company called, I'll say Device Anywhere. So you actually have a couple options there.
Yeah. So Device Anywhere is a slightly different model. That's more for interactive use. So they actually take phones and put them in a box with the, depending on the capabilities of the phone, they might even have a camera pointing at a little toucher that goes and touches the screen, assuming they can't do everything over USB. So it's not just an Android-specific thing. They'll actually take any mobile device and go and make it so you can access it remotely. They do support Android as well, so they do have a large collection of Android phones available for to use. Both of these are paid services, so you do have to go and get a subscription to go and use it. But if you do really want to go and have access to most of the phones out there on the market, both of them are very good solutions, and they target, again, slightly different markets, depending on whether you want interactive use or to run an automated test suite.
Yeah. To answer the other part of the question, we don't currently have a program where we act as a sort of I guess middleman between developer and any of the OEMs, but there's absolutely nothing preventing you from contacting them directly and requesting some loaner devices. And depending on your relationship with them, if you have an app that's likely to be like a pre-install or something, in a lot of cases they might be happy to hook you up with a tablet or a couple of phones or something like that. It just will not really happen through us. Right, question in chat?
Yeah, I see. What are your thoughts on when a manufacturer makes an inappropriate change to the Android framework? An example is that Motorola's new Razr has a default pattern background on list view N, whereas on a vanilla device, list views by default have a transparent background. While a fix has been found for this issue, it's a lot of extra work, and we can't always predict things like this.
Okay. So we have two things that basically go and are designed to go and combat breakages in the Android framework. It's the Android Compatibility Definition Document and Compatibility Test Suite, so CDD and CTS. These are both online. You can go and find them. Just search for Android Compatibility, just search for Android CDD or Android CTS, you'll find it. The CDD is a PDF file that goes and explains in great detail everything that an Android device should do to be considered a compatible Android device. The CTS takes those and creates automated test code that we use as part of the process of verifying new devices. So the CDD is the actual definition of what compatibility is. The CTS helps enforce it. Not everything in the CDD is codified in the CTS. We've tried to add as much as we can, but it's not exhaustive. We're constantly adding new things to it. So that the CTS is expanding over time. So what's happened here is one of two things. Well, one of three things. I mean, first off, manufacturers are welcome to go and change the Android framework as long as they don't do it in a way that breaks apps. And again, breaks apps means violates CDD. If they found a way to go and break apps that is not codified in the CDD, let us know. File a bug on b.android.com so we can go and update that. And if it is in the CDD, it's likely that it's just not in CTS and somehow it slipped through our testing. So if that's the case, again, file a bug on b.android.com. Let us know. We'll try and make sure that we get that into a future release in CTS, and we can try and make sure that doesn't slip through in the future. So without looking at this issue, I can't tell you which bucket that's fallen into, but there are several approaches we can use to go and try and help there. No, it's B, it's in bugs. So b.android.com.
I think the likely scenario in here is that the pattern background is just part of their UI. I think for Moto it's called Moto Blur. In which case, I know that for ice cream sandwich and forward, part of the CDD is that Holo be installed on the device. Brian points out, rejoice for a Holo and its guarantees. What that means is that if you target if your app targets the Holo theme, it would be a violation of CDD for them to actually change Holo. So you can be guaranteed that you won't have, for instance, Motorola's patterned background.
Right. They still are allowed to go and bundle whatever UI changes they want, again, as long as they meet the CDD. But they're not allowed to go, that has to be specified as a separate theme. So if you actually do explicitly ask for the Holo theme, you will always get the exact same Holo theme on any app, on any phone that is modern. So.
Great, thank you. We're getting more questions coming in. I just found an answer to my sync adapter naming question. If you use the Android label attribute on the used content provider, that label is shown at accounts and sync.
Awesome.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks for circling back.
Yes, exactly. Thank you for posting that.
Yeah. So I see somebody's typing to actually the moderator questions. So I think the next question is new as well. And then I think I want to say you just call, is it Action View?
Action View?
Yeah, you fire an intent with with that APK's local URL as the target, and that will go ahead and cause Package Manager to go ahead and open up and process the installation on your behalf. So we actually do have a tool like that internally that we use too. So it actually works pretty well. So.
There's another question that we have here on chat. I have another USB host question. I have an app that uses USB host with an intent filter. It works great when you plug the device in and it launches the app, or when you run the app, then plug in the device. The problem is when you leave a device plugged in and launch the app multiple times, no intent is fired for the device. Do you have thoughts on reusing the XML filter in the activity? I would rather not specify the filter in code and in XML.
I'm not sure why that would be happening. I don't know that specifying the filter twice would help anything.
Yeah, I don't think specifying it twice would help. I want to say that probably there's got to be some way to work around this. I haven't done as much with USB host mode as I'd like to. And by that, I mean I actually haven't done anything because I haven't built any USB host peripherals yet. So there's probably some subtlety there that allows you to work around this. It seems like the sort of thing the framework team would have noticed. Unfortunately, I don't know it off the top of my head. We can go ahead and follow up with somebody on the framework team and try and find out for you.
And he posted a follow-up point here. Well, I can get the device from the manager, and then if I'm not sure what that means. If the vid and PID, I can filter it again.
So
Process ID and
User
Yeah,
ID,
whatever it
maybe?
is.
Yeah. Sorry, that wasn't clear. Well, that's all right. So I'm assuming the vendor
vendor
ID
ID,
and
product
product
ID,
ID.
right.
Okay,
Yeah.
fine.
yeah, so I mean, it sounds like there is a workaround there then, right? Is there some reason then that doesn't work so well? We're waiting as Christopher types
Yeah,
here.
right.
Awkward silence.
It's fragile change later on, and I would rather not specify it twice. Okay, well, it sounds like that actually might be the only option. So, again, usually our recommendation is when you see something that you really don't like in the framework, certainly let us know. We do try and keep an eye on what people say. Log it on our issue tracker as well, so that we have it logged for the future, and we're trying to figure out what changes we should make for the next revision of these services. We have it there. But yeah, thank you for the feedback. It's good to know.
Thank you. We have a question here. Looks like a moderator. What is the easiest way to send emails from an app?
So there's a couple ways you can do it, depending on what you want to do. So if you just want to go and launch Gmail or the built-in email app to go and process the email on your behalf, the easiest way to do it by far is just to go and use an intent and use action send. It'll go ahead and prompt the user for what app they want to use to send it, which is typically going to be Gmail or the email app. Or it might even be something else that can process text too, if they'd rather, for example, I know I like to save stuff in Evernote, and so Action Send gives that as an option too. You can restrict it to a subset of apps if you want as well. So if you really do want it to go Gmail or email, but I can assume those are the only two email clients installed on the phone. They could have something like K9 installed. But anyway, it'll take your text, bring up the email activity, open up a composed window, and let the user send it. Now, if you want to send an email without prompting the user, I think the only way to do that is actually to get you have to ask the user for their credentials and open an SMTP connection directly. Like, are you aware of a way to do it automatically otherwise?
I don't think so. I don't think there's, just by design, we wouldn't set it up such that it was easy to send an email using user credentials without any sort of user interaction whatsoever.
Yeah, I
And
mean,
then the Android device would basically become like a spam opportunity.
yeah, I do know we do have something similar for SMS.
Right.
You can actually send an SMS without prompting the user part, but it does go and display warnings on screen letting them know that an SMS is being sent.
Right.
But I don't know if we've actually ever implemented something similar for email.
I don't think we have for email now.
I would say that for things like email and other things where it's sort of a generic function of the system, we tend to believe in having a developer send an intent out for a particular action and allow the user to choose which application they want to use in order to accomplish it. This gives the user a lot more choice. It's actually a feature of Android that you can have several different ways of, say, sending an email or displaying a picture or something like that. And our preference is to allow that. So.
Yeah, and just as one more follow-up there, most of the times too, when I see email being sent on the device, opening up the email client and letting them edit the email is the correct action. Usually when you don't want that is something where it actually would make more sense to send an HTTP request to a server under your control and then send the email on your behalf, with your company or your server in the from header. Because if the user isn't actually clicking send, that email isn't actually from the user. So, and then, of course, if you're sending it from your server, you have a lot more flexibility over all that too. So
That's a good point. Thank you, Trevor.
I think we're out of time, actually.
Okay. Are we?
we are actually 2 minutes over.
Well, okay, we had fun today. So thank you very much for stopping in, and we hope to see you all next week.
All right.
Thank you.
See you, everyone.
Bye, guys. Thanks.